Welcome back to another season of Inside Sports Fantasy Football. And to everyone out there watching on Lakers Fast Break, Pop Culture Cosmos, Inside Sports, welcome to ISFF Inside Sports Fantasy Football. It's Gerald Glassford coming right back at you here from the Pop Culture Cosmos, ISFF, of course, Lakers Fast Break. How are you doing today? We thought we'd go ahead and give you a special treat. It is called Inside Sports Fantasy Football. Also here with me today is the man indeed, along with his son. Go ahead and check him out today as part of the Domination Sports Nation. Dominic Lardieri is not here with us today, but his dad sure is. My longtime partner on ISFF, of course, it's Inside Sports Fantasy Football. Of course, it is, of course, my good friend indeed, Chris Lardieri. And Chris, great to have you here, my friend. Welcome back for another season of Inside Sports Fantasy Football. Oh, I can't hear you, man. It looks like you were on. You were doing great. Everything's absolutely. Hopefully, it's not a precursor to our season, but I'm telling you, man. I'm sure when you'll pop back on, you got your volume back in there. I think everything will sound good. Just waiting for you, my friend. All right. All right, indeed. But of course, it is Gerald Glassford. Thanks so much again for joining us. We are talking Inside Sports Fantasy Football. The thing we're talking about today is, of course, fantasy football drafts are around the corner. For some, they're happening this week. For some, they're happening this weekend. So we were going to go ahead and discuss if you are always struggling coming out the gate. Let me ask you this. Is it time to change your approach to fantasy football? Can you hear me now, Chris?
Yeah, I could hear you all along, but whatever happened, my mic went dead. I apologize, but thanks for having me back, although I might not be back for much longer.
What, man? You're the part of the tag team. You're my teammate on this, my friend.
Oh, well, thank you. I was trying to say before my mic decided to just drop out on me was, I believe this is season 6. We've been doing this show together, flew by. So
Yes.
Always great to be back. Dom's studying for a test and sends his regards.
Absolutely. No, it's obviously education first. That's fine. Absolutely. And I know he'll come on and provide his usual insight, but also here today is the man himself. You guys know him as the guy behind Oxide 247 at LakersBall.com, plus also as well the owner of SimBlades with the Y.com. It is Joe Soro. Joe, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. This looks like he's on the road. All right. He's mobile as well. So great to have everyone here. Cannot thank you enough for stopping by. I wanted to go ahead and again tell everybody out there this is a special Inside Sports Fantasy Football. We're putting it on all of our channels just to go ahead and let everybody know that we're back for another season of ISFF. And again, fantasy football drafts, they're everywhere right now. For a lot of people, they're getting ready for it. Chris, I will start with you first. So I know a lot of people out there that do play fantasy football on a regular basis, and I see each and every year individuals that are out there that struggle to start the season every single year, and they're always climbing uphill. I don't want to say I'm one of those because I've had varying levels of success during the front part of the season. I did win our league last season. I will be honest and upfront with that. I did do an ESPN league yesterday, and picking 7th obviously wasn't the best deal for me, but I still managed to go ahead and pick a quality team. Your thoughts, my friend, on those out there who are continuing to struggle with what they do in fantasy football? Maybe it's actually the right time to go ahead and look at it from a whole new perspective.
I think there are a couple things people do wrong. There's a lot of noise out there. As we were discussing before the show, there are a ton of podcasts, websites, so-called experts. And if you listen to enough of that, you can feel like you're watching CNBC and your head will spin. And let's face it, there's no real accountability with these so-called experts. They don't tell you how accurate their picks are. Whether it be draft picks, free agent recommendations, start sit recommendations during the season. So you've got that. Second of all, a lot of times people are working off of preset rankings. I know our league, for instance, which congrats, by the way, you won. Still reminded of that in my nightmares. All kidding aside, you go in there, Yahoo's got
But
their
we
rankings
still
set
have
for
not had the final game between you and I.
I know. The others don't cooperate. Maybe it'll be this year.
Okay.
But you see these preset rankings, and people think that's your Bible. I got to go like, oh, that's the next highest guy. Or the other trap people fall into is, let's just say, a running back goes first, and then high quality wide receiver goes second, and then there's a run on one of those two positions from like say 3 through 7, and you're sitting there at 8, and you just panic. You're like, oh, the running backs are gone. I got to take a running back, or I've got to take a wide receiver. It just sounds very simple, but you've got to kind of stay the course, look at your rankings. Don't use that as a Bible, but look and say, all right, I need a wide receiver here, or kind of be a contrarian. All these running backs are going. I'm not going to overpay for a Tony Pollard type like I made the mistake of last year late in the first round. I'm going to get me a top wide receiver, and then on the turn in the second round, we'll figure things out from there. So those are my pieces of advice. I just don't think it's like when we first started playing, say in the late 90s, where maybe you'd go buy a book and print something out off of a ESPN or a Yahoo and just kind of like go through it, a highlighter, scratch names out. You kind of could see the big picture and say, I don't like this guy. I don't think he's a 5th ranked player on my board.
Actually, I never really had to buy the books because I worked for the Good Guys, and under the same roof was Tower Records, and they had a huge magazine section. So whenever we had our in-work draft, NFL draft in the cafe that's in the middle, because it was Good Guys on one side, in the middle was a cafe, and Tower Records on the other side.
Oh, nice.
All of us guys would just go over to the magazine section, get the huge fantasy football books, put it in front of us, and able to
good old days.
Joe, let me get you in on this, my friend. I know you have a lot of friends out there that do play fantasy football, and you have achieved great success in your leagues in past years as well. Your thoughts, my friend, on if you knew people out there that continuously struggle with their drafts or continuously struggle to get started. They'll make changes during the season that'll get better and better, but maybe you should, you go in and you give them some tough love to tell them that maybe the way they should change their approach to the way they start their seasons.
I probably have run into more problems with the rules of the league in terms of, let's say you have a 12-man team and roster spots are abundant. What ends up happening in those leagues is the second you have a couple of injuries, there's no one on the wire. So I've been trying my best to, because I don't have time to be a president of a league and do all that stuff. I'm going to be in a couple of leagues this year. One of the leagues that I've been in for years is finally dropped off, and I'm going to be in a couple this year, which is actually good. 2 is usually a preference. 3, I'll do 3, but 2 is usually the one. That's when I really do my best work, is when I don't have as many to think about. But I think as long as your league allows you a chance to upgrade due to unforeseen circumstances, you should be able to compete. And if you don't, you probably don't know what you're doing. And this fantasy football is like poker. You do need some luck, but you also need to know how to position your players. You need to pay attention to matchups. You need to pay attention to the likelihood of what certain players will do in certain games, depending on the matchups. And there's a lot of knowledge that a lot of people don't have. It's not just from this year, last year. It's from years of kind of getting a feel for how football is played. And I'm either in the championship, winning or losing, or I lose on one really bad decision in the second round. And that, again, I don't know I wouldn't know how to explain to someone who isn't educated enough to play consistently and well, because how are they going to have that knowledge? How are they going to know, offensive philosophies, if they're not watching, like, let's say I am. I'm a pretty dedicated football watcher, and it's been like that for a very long time. How are you going to explain to them that for some weird reason, I don't know, I'm just going to use an example from the past. Tom Brady and the Patriots struggled when they went to Miami. It's too warm. It's too humid. It was too uncomfortable for them. Otherwise, they were pretty good. And then I remember the Broncos used to whoop the Patriots back in the late 90s. How do you explain that? Like, and I'm just using examples again. Those type of things you have to kind of pay attention to the pulse. You have to kind of have your finger on the pulse in the league, and you'll be able to understand, okay, well, Patrick Mahomes last year, for example, there were a lot of times where you started feeling like, there was some adjustments that the league made, and how is he going to play in this particular week? And quarterbacks are always the funny players in fantasy football. Those who don't really know how to play always seem to gravitate to quarterbacks because they're throwing 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, not knowing that when you look at the numbers, what is that? Let's say if they throw, let's say, a couple touchdowns and throw for 300 yards. Usually in my leagues, it's only 4 points, so that's 8 points, and then you have 12. They only give you 20 points. They do all that work and they take up all that offensive time for only 20 points, versus if it's a receiver catching the ball 10 times and scoring 2 touchdowns, you're getting, and I'm not even factoring in the yards, right? Let's say they get 100 yards. Now you're looking at, just in catches and yards, you're looking at 20 points plus another 12 points of, from the touchdowns. And those are the things, when someone asks me, Joe, how should I play if they haven't played before? I usually give them that example. If you can master that and understand that receivers and running backs are probably going to play key roles in how you play out during the year, and don't get mesmerized by the quarterback, you're probably going to compete very, very well. And try and find a running back that can catch outside. I always look at 3-4 catches a game from a running back. That's how I scope the running backs. If they can do that, it's nice to get 4 points just from catches outside the backfield. A lot of times they'll get maybe 20, 30 yards from that. So now they're adding another 3 points. So just in their secondary tasks, they're pulling in at least 6 or 7 points. And then, of course, if they have a couple touchdowns, now you're looking at just from those 2 activities, you're looking at almost 20 points, not even counting the yards that they're running. And that's as basic as it gets. I don't know if that was basic for a lot of you watching, but that's the easiest way I can explain it.
So if that's the case, and once again, it's Inside Sports Fantasy Football, Gerald Glassford along with Joe Soro and Chris Lardieri. Truly appreciate you joining us. Chris, I want to bring it back to you, my friend. If that's the case, you see it a lot of times in a lot of drafts, if they start following, and you mentioned it, one wide receiver will get picked, then somebody will go ahead and you'll see us like a whole run on wide receivers, even though there might be quality tight ends, running backs, other players that might make a difference on your team. Again, I sometimes I see it, just people, they fall in love or just fall into whatever the trend is sometimes during a course of a draft, because they feel that they have to get some of these guys before time runs out.
Yeah, definitely. And there's no need to. It's just too much of an amateur move and panicking. It's just more of like lemming behavior. That's where, too, to Joe's point, you definitely need to know your scoring system. I mean, the whole 4-point QB touchdown versus 6 for other players is a huge thing. The other thing I would say is you've got to know if you're playing in a PPR league, and if so, is it half point? Is it 1 point? That really comes into play. Everyone last year thought you would have been nuts if you took Christian McCaffrey first. They thought one of the wide receivers like Justin Jefferson should have gone first. Well, no one knew looking into the crystal ball he'd be healthy for the whole season, but part of his value is he could catch the ball out of the backfield, not just run with it. So you've got to look at guys like that. And then two, I wouldn't necessarily fall in love with a lot of these rookies. There are going to be some that produce, but I don't think, and who I'm targeting here, and it's nothing against him, part of it was his awful head coach last year, was Bijan Robinson was getting picked somewhere in the middle of the first round last year. While on paper that looked good, he turned into a platoon running back and didn't get the touches he needs. So don't go off just what you're seeing in preseason, all the noise you're reading on the internet or social media that so-and-so is getting a lot of reps. I mean, it is an 18-week season. A lot of things change.
And if that's the case, my friend, would you consider at this point in time, because Bijan Robinson is now one of the top draft picks in this year's draft. So how much has changed from the speculation from the time he was a rookie to the time now? What more is now expected because he is now at the top of everyone's list of running backs?
Yeah, and I can't necessarily fault them for that. He's got a way better quarterback, whether, Kirk Cousins comes back healthy. I mean, is he worth all that money? I don't know. That's another debate for another show, but he's a quality NFL starting quarterback, unlike what the Falcons had last year. He's got a whole new offense and a whole new coaching staff. And, considering the Falcons used a high pick on him, he's going to get the ball. But it's just, no one knew that last year. Small sample size, just heard a lot of noise about he was getting all these reps in practice in the preseason. But now, things are changed and they're going to have to give him the rock. So I wouldn't fault people for taking him.
Joe, bringing it back to you, my friend. So if that's the case, again, and you have someone that friend or whatnot, just continually struggling coming out of the gate, what's the best advice, just short term, that you might want to look at giving them?
Do you want the fake answer or the real answer?
Just a real answer. You get tough love,
real
whatever
answer
you
is
need.
I hope you die.
Okay.
I want them to suck, and I don't care if.
What if they're not in your league, though?
Usually, if I'm not in their league, usually I'm a pseudo player for them. I was a. What's the word? I was an avatar for my buddy on 2 years in a row. One year, went to the championship game, the other, back-to-back seasons. I've done that because he was asking me, and at some point I said, dude, just give me your Yahoo, I'll log in, I'll take care of it for you. And that's essentially what my my contribution is usually when someone is not in my league and needs help. At some point, I'm just going to go in there because it's very easy for me to set lineups and know what's going on during the week. Stuff sticks to me, and I think that the cool thing is I don't need to listen to the pundits on TV to know what's going on. I can go to certain spots during the week and on the internet. Also, I pay attention to kind of the games. I have Red Zone. I'll have that on when the Steeler games are not on, and I'll be paying attention to what's going on. And then I will, on occasion, watch some post-game stuff on NFL Network if the hosts aren't obnoxious. Sometimes even ESPN. And then I'll get enough fill from those to understand what's going to likely happen later. But as far as just guiding my friends, yeah, typically I'll end up being their avatar on most of their leagues, and I'll end up playing for them, and then they'll win or they won't.
So with that, Chris, the drafts are now in full force. People are drafting left and right. This weekend should be a good time for a lot of fantasy football drafts over the next couple weekends. So I ask you with that in mind. In fact, our draft is coming up soon. I know that, just right around the corner. With that in mind, I want to ask you, I mean, are you changing your approach in any way, shape, or form, or are you just sticking to tried and true? I found myself falling back to my old habits. Supposedly it works out well, but then again, I don't always trust these grading systems now. They've added in recent years these grading systems, and I mentioned that ESPN gave me an A. Yahoo gave me an A to start off the season with last year, and it didn't work out so well in the beginning. I had an up and down season up until the end where it went on a really up note, and I finished the league where I did. But maybe it's time to look at something in a different way as far as the way you're doing things, if you just don't think that it's not working out as well as it should.
Yeah, so I think fantasy football draft grades are almost as useless as real life NFL draft grades, but I digress. So for me, I think the thinking that's involved is once you know where you're picking in the draft, you can kind of target 2 to 3, 4 players that will probably be around where you are, unless you got the number one pick. Yeah, you can kind of have an idea of what will happen. And then what that will do is if your guys are still there and you're at the back end of the first round, for instance, it kind of sets this, value of sorts where it's like, oh, wow, I had this guy ranked and he's still sitting here. I thought he would have been gone by now. So in terms of trying to predict, I think about all you can do is the first round, and in any given year, there's always one knucklehead who reaches on someone, and if you're behind him, you should be happy. Give yourself a high five. Someone you want's going to fall to you. The other thing I would say is I think you should look back at last year's scoring leaders, not because that's a harbinger of what's going to happen this year, but look to see who had the most fantasy points in your league based on your scoring system. And what you will find, I took a peek this week at one of my leagues, and a lot of quarterbacks are at the top. But what's surprising is after that run of the elite quarterbacks, a lot of wide receivers, you'll see some running backs trickle in there. So my point is, don't go out and pick a quarterback in round one. Chris, why do you say that? You just said quarterbacks get a lot of points because it's harder to find those wide receivers and running backs that will put up the top numbers. And then thirdly, I think also to Joe's point, you've got to be an observer of football. You can't just be crunching numbers, looking at injury reports, listening to beat reporters talking about who's getting targets and reps in practice. You've got to physically watch these games. If you can't watch them, like Joe said, watch the highlights. And at the beginning of the year, I think what you've got to do is not watch preseason football, but just kind of observe, look at the team, see what they've done in the offseason. And you've almost got to kind of make a forecast. You say like, you look at last year with Mahomes, everyone thought he was going to be a great pick. Well, yeah, I know they won the Super Bowl, but from a fantasy perspective, they had a big mean reversion last year. Mahomes did not put up the fantasy numbers he did back in 22. Last year, Dom and I had some high hopes for the Lions and managed to get a few of those guys on our teams, and that paid off. So you've got to kind of do things like that. Not so much predict, but think like, all right, I've had so many people ask me as a Giants fan, are you happy with Malik Neighbors? I sure am. I think it's a great pick. Oh, do you think he'll be good in fantasy? Probably not. He doesn't have anyone good throwing the ball to him. And if he does, if he does get Daniel Jones back, that's not looking too prosperous right now. So you've kind of got to think of it that way. I like a wide receiver, but does he have a quarterback that'll get me the ball? Does he have an offensive line if he's a quarterback that will protect me? Or is he beneficial for the run game? So you've kind of got to take this like big picture approach of your draft too. Don't draft a guy just because you like him.
Excellently said. Well said indeed. Once again, it is Inside Sports Fantasy Football. Both guys coming at you with what they think is the best advice to give you, and very well said by both guys. It is Joe Sorrell, Chris Ardieri, and me, Gerald Glassford. Appreciate you watching, listening. It's our 6th season of Inside Sports Fantasy Football. Truly appreciate you joining us. And I will say, Joe, though, I know we touched on the rookies very quickly, though, and I know Chris has talked about how rookies, for the most part, do not produce right away. I know there's some exceptions. Obviously, Cool Bro, who's in our audience, knows that to be the case in regards to what he thought as far as a rookie that's producing right away. But with 6 quarterbacks in the first round selected, a lot of high hopes on a lot of these. Now, obviously, J.J. McCarthy at Minnesota, he is done for the year. So obviously that's strike one on one right there. But Joe, is there any rookies of interest to you when you're drafting, or is just a rookies just a absolute stay away and too big of a gamble for you?
We're talking rookie quarterbacks?
A rookies period. Because the rookies, like for instance, at running back, a lot of them that do get play are usually in the 3rd or 4th round. So it's a little bit harder to gauge exactly who will make a contribution there.
That's a really good question. I'm gonna obviously give my first, like the first thing that popped in my head when you asked that was Marvin Harrison Jr. I believe that if Marvin is anything mentally like his father, he is going to be a very scary player. I mean, we're talking, if you think Jamar Chase and Jefferson are good, I think you might have to, you'll question, what a great player this guy is going to be. And I would say that would probably be the first one. And I say that because the NFL, and I'm not a fan of this. I'm not a fan that the quarterback and the throwing game has become so dominant. And we've talked about this on even Lakers Fast Break, and that a lot of running backs and a lot of players have been balking at the market and how they've minimized their worth. Well, you guys all agreed to this, and you've made the quarterback position so important to the point where you don't really need anything, because you're protecting that quarterback, and that quarterback is going to likely throw 300 yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns a game, no matter how bad they are. I always use Kirk Cousins as an example. Kirk Cousins will throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns for 7 out of the 17 games, and will get all the money in the world. Yet you're not going to win anything with him. As far as rookies, as far as the way the league is, receiver-wise, and how important it is in terms of fantasy football, yeah, Marvin Harrison is the one that came up in my head. I did like how Brock Bowers played in preseason.
Mm-hmm.
And usually I don't say much about tight ends. That's usually a scary position. I feel like every other year, the tight end position is either just really terrible or really beneficial. It's not an accident that when I have a really good tight end, I always succeed. I always seem to go deep into the playoffs, get to the championship game. If I don't, then I struggle. It's that extra 7 to 14 points that I get each week that really takes me over. And then, of course, I had noticed that usually when I'm really successful, I have the MVP of the league at quarterback. I won one year with Patrick Mahomes, won the MVP. I won one year with Matt Ryan. He was the MVP. So for me, the tight end position is key. The quarterback being an MVP caliber is great. And then as far as a rookie, I won the year I had Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, his first year playing with Kansas City. I had Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey.
You took both.
Yes. At the time, no one really knew. They didn't know how it would play out. Obviously, Saquon was the first pick that year. And then I got McCaffrey, I believe, in the 3rd round. I had Cooper Kupp. Also, he got hurt though. I had Lockett off the bench, who replaced him later in that year. And then I had Kelsey. And I would always switch up defenses and kickers, obviously. So it was, in terms of rookie, I think the easiest position for a rookie then was a running back. Now I believe it's probably a receiver. So if you're going to go rookie somewhere, I would say it's going to be either Rome in Chicago or Marvin Harrison, which would be my first pick. And to piggyback off your comment about the quarterback selections in this year's draft, I don't know if I'm going to be wrong or right here, but I am not excited about this class. I actually think there's only going to be one quarterback out of this class that's going to be a good one. I think it's just only going to be one, and I'm leaning towards Daniels right now. Everyone else, J.J. McCarthy, Caleb Williams. I know Caleb Williams has the physical attributes to be great, but I'm worried that he's mentally not going to be 100% there when the going gets tough.
Well, the going will probably get tough for him anyways if you've seen that offensive line.
Well, see, and here's the thing. The Chicago Bears, for those people who don't know it, you can honestly say that, I mean, I know Bobby Douglas. I think Bobby Douglas ran for almost 1,000 yards as a I think he still holds the record. No, actually, maybe no. Actually, didn't Jackson break that record? Maybe Jackson broke it. I'm sorry, but Bobby Douglas and I always get Sid Luckman. Is it Sid Luckman?
I think it's Sid Luckman.
Yeah,
Yes.
I always get Sid Luckman and Sid Gilman always mixed up in my head. Sid Luckman honestly still has a argument of being the best Bears quarterback of all time. Now, guys, the Bears have been in the league. The Bears have existed since 1921. Yet Sid Luckman has an argument of being the greatest Chicago Bear quarterback. The same quarterback that beat the Washington Redskins in the NFL championship game 73-0. Yeah, I know. I remember this stuff. But again, the Bears have not been able to pick a quarterback to save their lives. Yes, Jim McMahon won them a Super Bowl, but that was like the Brad Johnson and the Trent Dilfer quality type quarterback. They won that Super Bowl because of the running game and defense.
And now Justin Fields is on your team, the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, Justin Fields is not an NFL quarterback, by the way, so everyone knows. And you're all going to find out here very soon. Russell Wilson, unfortunately, went the way of Bernie Kosar. That's the best description I can give of Russell Wilson. Bernie Kosar was fantastic for a decade, much like Russell Wilson, and both those guys hit the wall quick, fast, and hard. And I don't really have anything bad to say about Russell Wilson other than, you had a very good career considering you're 5'8". You won a Super Bowl, you went to 2, you had a great career. Not a Hall of Fame career, but the way that NFL votes these days, he probably would get in. But you're getting them at $1 million. I think there are worse positions to be in at the moment for the Steelers than than paying a guy $1 million to be your starter who could at least somewhat manage the game. Mm-hmm. But if for some reason he cannot even do that, then the Steelers are in major trouble because they are going to start Fields at some point. I believe that's probably going to happen. And the second Justin Fields starts playing, God help everyone.
So with that, my friend, let me go ahead and get it back to Chris Lardieri. Chris, are there any rookies that may be appealing to you in the middle rounds, later rounds? Obviously, there are no rookies that should be at the front of your draft, because if they are, that's a very big risk if that's the case. But sometimes, like Puka Nacua with the Rams, somebody can break out instantly coming out onto the field. Your thoughts on if any rookies, whether it's quarterback or otherwise, are appealing to people out there or should be appealing to people out there during the course of their draft?
Yeah, Dom passed this along to me. He couldn't make it tonight, but he said Marvin Harrison Jr. is a no-brainer. We agree with Joe. Is he a first-rounder? He may very well be, and I wouldn't call you crazy if you took him, mainly because just the sheer talent and the fact that
he's... Not to interrupt, but I'm picking him in the second if he's there. That's definite. I'm getting him in the second if he's there.
Yeah, from what I can see, I wouldn't be surprised if he's there end of the first round or at the turn at 2. But I think, with Kyler Murray kind of getting back into form, he's going to be the guy in Arizona. Not crazy to take him. There's always an outlier, too, like you said, Gerald. Later on, and Joe mentioned him, too, I think Jaden Daniels could be the surprise this year, the rookie quarterbacks as well. Will he be C.J. Stroud? I'm not sure. I don't think the Commanders are going to be a terrific team, but if they're playing from behind a lot, I think that's going to give him a lot of opportunity to throw and run. Now, I'm not saying he should be your QB1 unless you really wait late. And if you can get him as your QB1 and when you stack up your other positions, that's great. But just for some reason, he kind of strikes me as a guy like like a Stroud, who, people were like, we're not expecting much from him or the Texans this year. Ironically, they're both number 2 picks. So that's kind of the rookie I'm leaning towards in the middle to later rounds if he's still available. Williams, agree with Joe. Someone will take him just off his sheer talent, but I do feel like he's kind of like he tries to be like a Mahomes, but, just makes a lot of unforced errors. Drake May in New England, bad fit, not a fan of that. And don't even ask me about Bo Nix.
Well, he's going to be starting in Denver.
I'll give him that.
Bad, guys.
He's a starter.
It's going to be bad. I when I was watching the quarterbacks falling, JJ McCarthy going to Minnesota, I was just sitting there going, Jesus Christ, what is going on? Does anybody do any work here? I mean, just not good. It's not good, and the world's going to see how bad this is going to be. I'm predicting right now this is going to be the worst quarterback class in the history of the NFL in terms of its activity. You're talking.
It hasn't started off a good note because
you're talking about
out.
You're talking about an 83 redux, except it's going to go the other way. You're not going to have Dan Marino, John Elway, Jim Kelly. Hell, even Ken O'Brien was a decent quarterback. Todd Blackledge didn't work out too well, but you had 4
in the booth. It did.
Hey, absolutely great college booth guy. Hey, and again, guys, when I talk about this, this is me who's never played in the NFL, kind of crapping on these guys. These guys are all success stories, but I'm sorry to say, but some just couldn't hack it in the pros. But I mean, is anybody going to argue that Heath Schuler hasn't lived a beautiful life? I mean, I think that guy's won in life. So I might not have been a good NFL quarterback, but hey, they definitely won in life. That's as easy as I can say it.
Wasn't he a congressman for a while? So
Yeah,
he won twice.
He was mesmerizing. Actually, I was very impressed at I mean, between him and Steve Garvey, you got a good presence there. I didn't really know their politics too much. I still don't. I mean, I do know where they lean, but hey, if you can service your country, you can service your community in any way, and you look and sound and respectable. Hey, I'm gonna tip my hat off to you.
Don't even get me started on Garvey. I already told you, Joe, being the huge Dodgers fan that you are, I have no idea why he's not in the Hall of Fame. I just don't get why Steve Garvey is absolutely not in there. It does not make any sense to me. I mean, we always talk about, and you always talk about how these Hall of Fames just let anybody in, but the people that actually deserve to be included in there are just, it blows my mind. But I'll leave it at that. But before we head on out, guys, Chris,
I'll comment on that real quick here, Gerald. Until Scott Rowland got in, again, I'm sorry to be negative here. When I heard Scott Rowland got inducted in the Hall of Fame, I watched Scott play almost his entire. I watched him play his entire career.
Mm-hmm.
That is not a Hall of Famer. I'm sorry, he's not. And
are we basing it off of one postseason?
Look, baseball's different than any other sport. It's an individual sport. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to be the best individual player in the league at some point. Scott Rowland was never the best player at any time in his career. I did start getting a little uncomfortable when Tim Raines got in. Tim Raines has good, very good player, but never was the best player I've seen play. I mean, the baseball had gone through a couple of years here in the last 20 years where they didn't pick a Hall of Famer. That's how it's supposed to be. If you're not a Hall of Famer, you don't belong in Hall of Fame. And as far as Steve Garvey, yeah, now he really is now. If Scott Rowland got in,
World Series MVP,
Steve
NL
Garvey should get in
MVP.
now.
How many consecutive games did he play? I'll just leave it at that. 300 seasons left and right. I'll just leave it at that. But again, this is the Inside Sports Fantasy Football, so I won't go too much on a tangent because again, I'm a huge Garvey fan, and I grew up watching him, and that was just my deal. But before we go ahead on out, I wanted to go ahead and get you back on, Chris, on what we were talking about before we went on the air. Something you wanted to mention about the other shows that are out there, because I remember on the group chat that we had just a couple days ago when you're reminding everybody, hey, it's time to go ahead and get back involved in the league again. I'm thinking about retiring personally, but I have a feeling you're going to talk me into going ahead and coming back for another season. I was like, should I quit while I'm ahead and the winner, or should I go ahead and go back in for some more torture that I had during the course like I did last season, because my team was not definitively good until it mattered the most. But I'll just leave it at that. But you wanted to talk about some of the other shows and programs out there, about how they're not focusing on fantasy football, but on a lot of other things besides fantasy football. And you have a real problem with that, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I realized, all right, I got to send my text out and invite everyone and get the Yahoo League up and running. And my work league, the commissioner did the same thing recently. And I said, just for craps and giggles, let me poke around Spotify and see what's going on in the fantasy football podcast landscape. And the usual suspects are out there. I'm not going to name them. They get enough attention and downloads and listens. But, they're the Jim Cramers of the fantasy football world. They're big personalities and don't have much to show for it. Just a lot of bluster. And then just kind of digging through some of these ones that are supposedly popular by whatever Spotify metrics use. It's just a lot of shtick. It's a lot of bad comedy. It's a lot of salesmanship. Sometimes it's a lot of technical jargon. And don't get me wrong, I deal with numbers for a living, and I'm comfortable poking around my fantasy football stats. But, I don't know if I'm listening to some sort of like professional gambling show or a fantasy football show. One of these fantasy shows, it's just three guys going back and forth making movie references half the time, and I zone out. So look, I'm not one to pat myself on the back, but I think we got a pretty damn good show here. And looking at a lot of the junk that's out there, I don't know what we need to do to make this more popular, but yeah, it's just not that good. I almost feel like some of the best content just still in proverbial print, looking on websites, or even, poking around social media sometimes for some nuggets, or even just reading some good old school football content, football writing.
I just am concerned myself, because in recent years, and I'll bring it to you, Joe, it's become more commercialized with ESPN Bet, with DraftKings, with all these different apps that are designed to take your money and really not get a whole bunch of stuff out of it. It's fantasy football. The landscape has changed, Joe, and the way it's now promoted and produced, it is more commercialized. We live in a capitalistic society here in the United States, and so of course it's going to become more and more money driven. And I know that's always a point and a stickler for you, Joe, when we do the Lakers Fast Break, or we talk about shows of that ilk in the sports genre. But it's just a reality of life. And I think Chris starts to feel it too. And that's what he's intimating at, is that these channels, these larger entities, have a real chance to reach to a broader audience with really good content, and refuse to do so for the sake of money.
Someone who believes in the freedom of the market. The market dictates the activity. And you can blame the DraftKings and the controllers of all that all you want. At the end of the day, we have free will, and we're deciding to do and encapsulate ourselves in that. What I try to do as an individual is I explain to those that I am a capitalist. I believe in it. I believe it's the safest, easiest way to prosper. But it cannot be at the expense of quality. And ethics is a very broad scale. Ethics in my scale is, I am never going to screw somebody out of their money in any business transaction, deliberately try to take their money under their nose. If I was going to take their money, they're going to know about it, and it's some form of competition. It's not going to be some, hey, I'm going to sell you this rock. It's worth $5,000 when it's really worth 5 cents. You know what I mean? You see the difference? So what gambling and the NIL have done recently, because gambling has now become kind of at the forefront. It's always been there, but now it's at the forefront without shame. What you do there is you now create more of a controlled, or at least a conspiracy controlled narrative. Do you really believe that the NFL, now that they're in bed with the gambling people versus having them kind of at length distance, at an arm's distance, how do we not know that they're not going to start looking at the rules of the game and say, hey, we need to cater to more of this so that the gamblers keep watching, just like fantasy football has dictated the rules. A lot of the reasons why the quarterback position has become what it's become is because people want to see more scoring, which has always been that way. By the way, folks, that's never changed. They changed the rules in 1978, where you had to stop hitting the receiver after 5 yards, right? And I'm sure there were people back then saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe football's turning into a dance recital." Like you knew that was going on then. And I don't mind change, but I didn't feel when I look back at that time, I didn't feel like there was a detriment to the quality of the game. Whereas in the last decade, there's been a detriment to the quality of the game, and that defense and the running back positions have become such a luxury at certain moments. It's not even something that's even close to being reliable anymore. It's just a luxury. I think that took away from the football culture, and they turned it into a gimmicky game, much like what the arena football game used to be. And I think that's a shame, because I like to see the defense sometimes. There's no intimidation. The Steelers used to win games before they even would come on the field, just because they knew, oh shoot, we're gonna have to play the Steelers. And I'm just happy that I was coherent, old enough, an adult to watch the 2004 through 2011 Steelers, because those 8 seasons, that run where they went to 3 Super Bowls, won 2, was the last just remnants of what football used to be. And I have to give credit to the Baltimore Ravens as well, almost evenly, that they created the essence of what football is. It was because of those 2 teams in that time that made football what it is. And the sad thing about that is we'll never see another Troy Polamalu. Not because there isn't somebody out there that could play like him. It's just he won't be allowed to play that way. And neither will Ray Lewis. You'll never see another Ray Lewis. And that's a sad thing. And they could have done it where they didn't have to be so strict. But we live in a country where, this is the part I don't like about America. It's one of the few things. We can't give out food that's a day old because we're worried about litigation, even if it's to someone who's hungry. I heard about a suit where a guy gave away food that was a day old to some homeless people. The homeless people got sick and they got sued. That right there, folks, going back to what you said, Gerald, is human beings at some point have to decipher, at what point is money a limit? If it's always about the money, then society has absolutely failed. And if your response is, well, it's always been about the money. No, that's not true, folks. I didn't notice the thirst for money as much back maybe even 20 years ago. I knew plenty of people I just want to work, pay for my mortgage, and just kind of hang out. Nowadays, everybody wants to be an Instagram star. Everyone wants to be famous. Everyone wants to be known. It's a disgusting kind of culture at this point, and most of those people are nobodies that have no business being, you know, popular.
The problem is, and I agree with you on that, the problem is the NFL created their own mess with the concussion issue and they dusted it under the rug. It's not like we didn't know about this. It's, 1930s and everyone's smoking cigarettes. It's like, the Roger Goodells of the world knew what they were doing. I'm not saying he was the one back in the 70s and 80s behind all this cover up, but when he worked long enough in the NFL and when he took the job, he knew it was going to happen. And to his credit, they changed the rules. But yeah, I get what you're saying. The whole day old food is just ridiculous. But I think what you say too goes hand in hand. Like I tell my kids this, they talk about influencers and this and that, and I say, well, in about 10 years, tell me where they are and what they're doing. Tell me what benefits they have, tell me what retirement they have. All that stuff looks great. It's just like, someone was a hit on cable access show back in the day. I know I'm dating myself. We're all old farts here, but that stuff doesn't last. It's 10 years ago, they were all YouTubers. Now they're influencers and they come and go.
Well, again, it's going, and how it pertains to the NFL. It's everybody's a brand, right? That's how people make their money. And the issue is the reason why quote unquote influencers are popular is because they're walking billboards, they're existing billboards, and we live in a consumer thirsty society. That's really the root of it. And what are we watching football for? You know how many times I was asked years and years. So it's not just now. It's sort of been there, but it's championed. Back then it wasn't championed. I don't know how many times I was asked when I was at a bar or somewhere where I didn't know the people, and I would get into the game, and they're, hey man, how much money do you have on the game? I go, I don't have any money on the game. I'm a Steeler fan. It's an interesting concept, right? And it cracked me up. I'm like, why do I have to gamble and to be emotional? And then of course they're thinking, well, why are you so invested in this? They don't, it's just a game. And then I'll explain to them. I'm like, it's competition. I can't play in the NFL. This is the second best I can go with. And the Steelers and the Lakers and the Dodgers, those are my three teams. They've given enough quality out there to support them and be loyal to them because they have given their fans something to be proud of and to cheer. And sometimes it's just, I just, it's as simple as that, folks. I don't need to benefit from it. Not everything has to mean something. I have 100 things that mean something. Can I just sit for 3 hours a day and have complete just focus on something that doesn't really mean anything, but it's fun to feel that euphoria of winning? It's really what it is. It's about winning. Winning. I'm addicted to winning. And that's why we watch. The fantasy football part, at least for me, is a way for me to communicate with people, my friends that are involved in it, and have a little kind of back and forth. Otherwise, I really don't see any sense in that either. I don't need fantasy football to enjoy the games. But I do enjoy the fact that, again, it comes back to the competition, and now I'm kind of involved in it. And as far as the knowledge of it, geez, I mean, I remember when I first learned about it. And for those of you who don't know, fantasy football has been around from I think the '60s. They used to do it old school style for years until the internet became what it did, and now we have what we have now. And I remember when I was looking at how this thing was played, I go, "Oh, I already know this stuff. I don't really. I mean, I'll update myself on a few things, but I already pay attention to the details. I'm not a guy. This isn't going to be too hard for me." And here we are 15, 16 years later and still playing, still winning leagues. And having fun, and sometimes I'll completely crap the bed. But again, it's still a chance to connect with people who are involved, whether they're sports people or not, and then of course we're doing this show. And as far as the popularity of this show, right? Just like when we talk about the Lakers Fast Break, here's what I'm proud of: we're not clickbaiting anyone, we're not BSing anyone. What anything in business, and this is somewhat of a business, what anything in business, what matters in business is how do you get yourself out there? Sometimes it's not enough just to get on air. Sometimes you're going to need some help in certain marketing avenues. And I will promise you this, that those days are coming. They're coming. I don't know when, but when they do, we're going to get a chance to maybe shine in front of all those DraftKings people who don't know anything. Because the beautiful thing about that is we can call them out and we'll be right. We'll be right because we know the information. They don't. I know. The reason why I don't watch the ESPN shows is because they keep putting people on those shows, and it's obvious they don't know shit about what they're talking about. It never used to be like that. You had to know what was going on. College Saturday, you had Baseball Tonight, Peter Gammons, and obviously Tom Jackson and Chris Burn. Like when you watch shows, you knew these guys were about it. Now they just put a bunch of jackasses on there, and it's like, oh yeah, so and so ran really well yesterday. I'm like, ran really well? Really? You're paying this person 6 figures a year to tell me that this guy ran well? And that's what's coming. And I think there's too many people worried about their jobs. That's why they don't really comment the way they want. And then there's the extreme. There's those who are too much overboard and are just there for the shock value. No, we're not going to shock anyone. We're going to give you facts, but we're also going to tell you, bring your facts then. Do you know what you're talking about? That's kind of where this is going to go. I really believe that's where it's going to go.
So with that, it is, of course, Inside Sports Fantasy Football. Truly appreciate you joining us. It is, of course, Joe Soro, a.k.a. Ox247 at LakersBall.com. He's with me quite a bit at Lakers Fast Break. And, of course, Chris Lardieri, Domination Sports Nation. It's Gerald Glassford, Pop Culture Cosmos, Inside Sports Fantasy Football, and Lakers Fast Break. Chris, next week we will have our annual last second draft thoughts because it will be the last week before the season starts. But any last thoughts before we head on
out? Just keep watching, keep observing. As we kind of hammered home throughout this podcast, kind of tune out the noise. I have no problem with draft lists. Don't misunderstand me, but I would use them as a guide. You can kind of keep an eye on them, see where guys are falling. And another thing, and Dom likes to do this, join a mock draft if you want to before. I mean, I know sometimes we'll do that just as kind of like a random dry run test just to see who falls where to get the feel of the flow of the draft. I know that when we have drafts, I feel like our second draft, which always happens the night before the season starts, I feel like we're a little more organized, a little more coherent, and then we're like, that guy reached, this guy fell. So by all means, if you can do that, do it. Or even if you've got friends who've drafted already, take a look at their final draft board and see who fell where. It's always good to observe.
One thing I also tell people is don't auto draft. If you could go ahead and make choices, especially in the back half of the draft, please stay around because you can not only pick up some good quality players, but just by the sheer fact that there's injuries involved quite a bit with the NFL, you're definitely going to go ahead and need a deep roster. Joe, any last thoughts, my friend?
I would auto draft if I wanted to prove a point.
Okay.
Kind of like I'm so much better than you guys. I'm going to auto draft and still whoop your ass in the year. But I haven't had a chance to do that yet. I'm still waiting for the right moment to do that.
And you would do that, I would imagine. So Again, it is the Inside Sports Fantasy Football. For everybody watching on all the other channels outside of the Pop Culture Cosmos, just want to let you know we'll be here on a weekly basis on the Pop Culture Cosmos channel on YouTube. So please like and subscribe there, or wherever you're watching this, on Facebook, on Twitch, on YouTube, wherever you're at. Please follow and like whatever it is we do. So go ahead and check us out each and every time out, whether we're talking basketball with the Lakers Fast Break, pop culture with Pop Culture Cosmos, or fantasy football with, of course, Inside Sports Fantasy Football. We'll see you next week, and good luck in all your fantasy football drafts.